She was hiding beneath the Duke's velvet seat when the carriage door slammed shut. He climbed in and ordered the driver to go. Matilda Palmer held her breath in the darkness, praying he wouldn't notice. Outside, horses thundered past, men hunting her, calling her name. The Duke sat inches above her, completely unaware he was carrying a fugitive. Hours earlier, Matilda had learned the truth. Her father sold her to a man who didn't want a wife, he wanted a victim. So she ran. Miles from anywhere, the carriage hit a rut. Something shifted beneath the seat, and when Edward Hamilton, Duke of Clarence, lifted the blanket, he found terrified eyes staring back at him. "Please," she whispered, "they'll kill me if you send me back." The Duke's jaw tightened. He'd built his life on order, discipline, and solitude. But the woman trembling before him was about to shatter all three. What neither of them knew, Matilda carried proof of crimes powerful men would murder to hide, and by helping her, the Duke just made himself their next target. Here's what happened. Matilda's lungs burned. The estate gates were 100 yards behind her now, but she could still hear them, boots on gravel, her father's voice commanding the stable hands to search the grounds, Lord Rathbone's cold laughter cutting through the morning air. They thought she'd hidden in the greenhouse, the chapel, the servants' quarters. They were wrong. She pressed herself against the stone wall bordering the road, silk skirts plastered to her legs with dew and panic. Her hands shook so violently she could barely grip the iron rail. A carriage was stopped ahead, black lacquer, silver crest gleaming in the early light. Workers crouched by the rear wheel, tools scattered across the dirt. The driver stood apart, arms crossed, watching them work. Matilda knew that crest. Everyone did. The Duke of Clarence and Avondale. Edward Hamilton, a man who rarely left his estate, who'd refused every social invitation for 3 years, who was famous for precisely 2 things: his immense wealth and his complete intolerance for disorder, the worst possible person to ask for help. But the shouts were getting closer. Matilda didn't think. She ran. The carriage door was unlocked, thank God, and she threw herself inside, pulling the door shut as quietly as her trembling hands allowed. The interior was dark, smelling of leather and something sharper. Tobacco, maybe, or cologne. A travel blanket lay folded on the opposite seat. She grabbed it, wedging herself into the narrow space beneath the bench seat, pulling the blanket over her body just as voices erupted outside. Saw someone running. Check the road. Miss Palmer wouldn't have gone far. Hoofbeats thundered past. So close, the carriage shook. Matilda bit down on her sleeve to keep from crying out. The voices faded. The hoofbeats disappeared toward the village. She stayed frozen, hardly breathing, counting her own heartbeats in the darkness. Then footsteps, calm, measured, expensive boots on packed earth. The carriage door opened. Someone climbed in. The bench above her head dipped slightly under his weight. A pause. Then, cool and precise, "Drive on." "Your Grace," the coachman called back. "Are you certain? The wheel is sufficiently repaired. Drive on." The carriage lurched forward. Matilda squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself invisible, smaller, non-existent. She'd made a terrible mistake. She should have hidden in the woods, should have run toward the river, should have. The carriage hit a rut. Her shoulder slammed against the interior wall. She gasped, soft, involuntary, and froze. Above her, the Duke went completely still. Seconds stretched like hours. Then, "Stop the carriage." "Your Grace?" "Stop." The carriage. The wheels slowed, stopped. Matilda heard him shift, heard the rustle of fabric as he leaned forward, and then the blanket was yanked away. Sunlight poured in. She blinked up at him, at sharp cheekbones and dark eyes and a jaw set like granite. He was younger than she'd expected. 30, maybe. Handsome in the severe way classical statues were handsome, and currently staring at her with an expression that suggested he'd just discovered a live serpent in his carriage. "Explain," he said. One word, no inflection. Matilda's mind went blank. She'd planned this, she'd rehearsed what she'd say if someone caught her, how she'd beg for help, how she'd explain, but every word evaporated under that iron stare. Her voice cracked. You needed to stow away in my carriage." "Yes." "Without permission." "Yes." "While fleeing from?" "Whom exactly?" Matilda hesitated. If she told him the truth that her father and Lord Rathbone were hunting her, that she'd been sold into a marriage designed to destroy her, he might send her back. Dukes didn't interfere in family arrangements. Dukes certainly didn't harbor runaway daughters. But if she lied, "My family," she whispered. Something flickered in his expression, not sympathy, something colder. "Assessment. Your name." Another hesitation. "Mary," she said. "Mary Thompson." The Duke's eyes narrowed fractionally. He knew she was lying. She could see it in the way his gaze sharpened, in the slight tightening of his jaw. But instead of calling for the coachman, instead of demanding the truth, he leaned back against his seat and studied her in silence. Finally, "How far were you planning to go, Miss Thompson?" "As far as the carriage would take me." "That," he said quietly, "may be farther than you realize." He knocked twice on the roof. The carriage rolled forward, and Matilda, still sprawled beneath his seat, still trembling, still lying, realized she'd just made either the best decision of her life or the last one. The Duke didn't speak for the next 3 miles. Matilda remained on the floor he hadn't invited her to sit, and she wasn't brave enough to assume watching the countryside roll past through the gap beneath the window shade. Her heart had finally stopped racing. Now she just felt cold and trapped. The carriage wheels hummed over smooth road. Inside, the silence was suffocating. She could hear every breath he took, every subtle shift of fabric as he adjusted his position. Finally, without looking at her, "You're injured." Matilda glanced down. Blood had soaked through her sleeve where she'd torn it on the estate gates. She hadn't even felt it. "It's nothing. It's bleeding onto my floor." Heat flooded her cheeks. "I'm sorry. I didn't. There's a handkerchief in the compartment beside you." She found it, pristine white linen, monogrammed, and pressed it against the wound. The bleeding slowed. "Thank you," she whispered. He didn't respond. Another mile passed. "Miss Thompson." She looked up. The Duke was watching her now, head tilted slightly, expression unreadable. "You're well-dressed, well-spoken. Your hands have never seen labor." He paused. "And yet you expect me to believe you're a servant fleeing a household dispute." Matilda's throat tightened. "I didn't say I was a servant. You didn't say anything of substance." His voice remained calm, clinical. "Which suggests you have something significant to hide. Everyone has secrets. Not everyone hides in my carriage." She met his gaze, surprised by her own boldness. "Would you have helped me if I'd asked?" "No." The honesty was startling. "Then," Matilda said quietly, "I chose correctly." Something shifted in his expression, not quite amusement, but close. "You're either remarkably clever or catastrophically foolish. Perhaps both." "That," he said, "is what concerns me." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and the space between them contracted. Matilda forced herself not to retreat. "Here is what I know," the Duke said. "You're running from someone with resources. The men pursuing you were well-mounted, organized. You're educated, which means family of means, and you're terrified, which means the threat is legitimate." Each word felt like a scalpel peeling back her defenses. "What I don't know," he continued, "is whether you're a victim, or the danger I've just invited into my life." Matilda's hands clenched in her lap. "I'm not dangerous. Everyone is dangerous when desperate. Then why haven't you thrown me out?" The question hung between them. The Duke straightened, his gaze never leaving hers. "Because I despise men who hunt frightened women, and because—" He paused, something darker crossing his features. "I recognize a trap when I see one." Matilda's breath caught. "A trap? You weren't simply fleeing, Miss Thompson. You were fleeing to something." His eyes narrowed. "Or someone. And until I understand what or who I need to know, if I've just made an enemy, I can't afford." The carriage slowed. They were approaching an estate vast, imposing, surrounded by iron gates and manicured grounds. Nothing like her family's showy wealth. This was older money, quieter power. "Where are we?" Matilda whispered. "My home." The Duke knocked on the roof. The carriage stopped. "Which is now yours, until I decide otherwise." "You're helping me?" "I'm containing you," he corrected. "There's a difference." The door opened. A butler appeared, silver-haired, expressionless, and barely blinked at the sight of a disheveled woman on the floor. "Grimsby," the Duke said, "prepare the east guest room." Quietly. "No staff beyond Mrs. Winters." "Of course, Your Grace." The Duke stepped out, then turned back, extended his hand. Matilda stared at it, at the offer of help from a man who'd just called her a potential threat, and felt something crack open in her chest. She took his hand. His grip was firm, steady. He pulled her up with surprising gentleness, but as her feet touched the ground, he leaned close enough that she could smell cedar and something darker, and spoke directly into her ear. "If you've brought violence to my door, Miss Thompson, you'll discover I'm far more dangerous than whoever you're running from." Then he released her and walked toward the house. Matilda stood frozen, watching him disappear through the entrance. The butler cleared his throat politely. "This way, miss." She followed, and with every step toward the Duke's estate, toward the sanctuary that felt more like an elegant cage, one thought pounded through her mind. He's right to be suspicious, because the men hunting me won't stop, and they'll burn down anyone who stands in their way. The East guest room was more luxurious than Matilda's bedroom at home. Cream silk wallpaper, a four-poster bed with velvet curtains, windows overlooking gardens so perfect they looked painted. It felt like a museum, or a mausoleum. Mrs. Winters, a stern-faced woman with kind eyes, had brought hot water, clean bandages, and a simple grey dress. No questions, no judgment, just efficiency and quiet sympathy. "His Grace requests you remain in this wing," she'd said while wrapping Matilda's arm, "for your safety and his discretion." Translation: don't wander, don't be seen, don't cause problems. Matilda sat on the edge of the bed now, alone, watching afternoon light crawl across the floor. She should feel relieved. Instead, she felt like a bomb waiting to explode. Because Rathbone wouldn't stop searching, her father wouldn't accept the humiliation. And when they discovered where she'd gone, when they learned the Duke of Clarence was harboring her, the door opened without warning. Matilda jumped to her feet. The Duke stood in the doorway, still in his traveling clothes, expression unreadable. "You didn't eat." She glanced at the untouched tray Mrs. Winters had left. "I wasn't hungry." "You're terrified?" he corrected. "There's a difference." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Matilda's pulse spiked. Propriety screamed this was inappropriate, dangerous, but he simply moved to the window, hands clasped behind his back. "I've made inquiries," he said without preamble, "about young women gone missing in the past week. No reports, no notices, no family searching publicly for a Mary Thompson." Matilda's hands curled into fists. "Which means," he continued, "either you're using a false name likely, or your family doesn't want anyone knowing you've disappeared." He turned to face her. "Both scenarios suggest something far worse than a simple family quarrel." She said nothing. "I also sent word to the magistrate's office," the Duke said, discreetly, asking if any legal disputes involving young women were pending. Matilda's breath stopped. 3 cases. He watched her carefully. 2 inheritances, 1 marriage contract. Her face must have betrayed her because his expression darkened. "The marriage contract," he said slowly, "involves Lord Edmund Rathbone and a Miss Matilda Palmer, daughter of Geoffrey Palmer, Under-Secretary to the Home Office." He paused. "The wedding was scheduled for yesterday." The room tilted. He knew. "The contract," the Duke continued, his voice colder now, "includes a rather unusual clause. If the bride becomes incapacitated, all property transfers to the groom's control immediately." He stepped closer. Convenient language for a man with Rathbone's reputation. Matilda's legs nearly gave out. She reached for the bedpost. "You're Matilda Palmer," the Duke said. It wasn't a question. She couldn't deny it anymore. Couldn't maintain the lie. "Yes, and Rathbone planned to have me declared mentally unfit after the wedding." Her voice came out hollow. "Lock me away. Take everything." "Why you?" "Because my mother's inheritance comes to me at 21. Because my father needed Rathbone's political support. Because—" her throat closed. "Because I was convenient." The Duke studied her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he moved to the armchair near the fireplace and sat a gesture that somehow felt like leveling the power between them. "Why didn't you go to the authorities?" he asked. "Rathbone has documents. Forged medical assessments claiming I'm unstable." Matilda's hands trembled. "And my father signed them." "Your own father. He's ambitious. I'm expendable." She forced herself to meet the Duke's eyes. "You should send me away. Rathbone will come here. He'll threaten you, ruin you. Let him try." The words were quiet, absolute. Matilda stared at him. "I don't respond well to threats, Miss Palmer." Something dangerous flickered in his expression. "And I particularly despise men who use the law to brutalize women. You don't know what he's capable of." "I know exactly what men like Rathbone are capable of." The Duke's jaw tightened. I've spent 3 years avoiding society because of them. The admission hung in the air. Matilda wanted to ask, wanted to understand the pain she heard beneath his words, but he stood abruptly, shutting down the vulnerability as quickly as it appeared. "You'll stay here," he said, "under my protection. We'll find a legal solution." "There is no legal solution. The contracts are signed." "Then we'll find an illegal one." Matilda's eyes widened. The Duke moved toward the door, paused with his hand on the handle. "Get some rest, Miss Palmer. Tomorrow we begin unraveling this mess." He glanced back. "And do eat something. I refuse to harbor a fugitive who faints from hunger." The ghost of dark humor. He left. Matilda sank onto the bed, mind reeling. She'd thought him cold, unfeeling, a man of pure logic, but she'd seen it just for a moment, the fury beneath his control, and something else. Recognition. He understood her trap because he'd escaped one of his own. Outside, night settled over the estate, and somewhere in the darkness, Matilda knew. Rathbone was getting closer. Matilda didn't sleep. She lay in the dark, listening to the estate settle around her, creaking floorboards, distant doors, the wind against the windows. Every sound felt like footsteps. Every silence felt like anticipation. At 3 in the morning, she gave up. The house was different at night. Moonlight turned familiar shapes strange. Her borrowed nightgown whispered against the floor as she moved through the corridor, drawn by something she couldn't name. She found him in the library. The Duke sat in a leather chair near the fireplace, still fully dressed, a glass of amber liquid in one hand and a letter in the other. He didn't look up when she entered. "Can't sleep either?" he said quietly. Matilda hesitated in the doorway. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to intrude." "You've been intruding since you climbed into my carriage, Miss Palmer." He set down the letter. "Might as well be consistent." She stepped inside, drawn to the fire's warmth. Up close, she could see the exhaustion in his face, shadows beneath his eyes, tension in his jaw. "You've been awake all night," she said. "I've been thinking. About Rathbone, about the impossibility of your situation." He gestured to the letter. "I contacted 3 attorneys today. All declined to take your case. 1, explicitly. 2, through polite excuses." His expression hardened. "They're afraid of him." Matilda's chest tightened. "I told you. You told me he was dangerous. You didn't tell me he owned half the legal system." The Duke stood, moving to the window. "Rathbone has connections in Parliament, the courts, the magistrates' office. Fighting him through legal channels is pointless." "Then I'll leave," she forced the words out. "Tonight, before he—" "Where would you go?" "I don't know, but I won't let you sacrifice." "I'm not sacrificing anything." He turned to face her. "I'm calculating." "Calculating what?" "How to destroy a man who believes himself untouchable." The words hung between them, sharp and deliberate. Matilda stared at him. "You can't—" "Can't?" Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. "Men like Rathbone thrive because people like me stay silent, comfortable, uninvolved." His voice dropped. "I've been that man for 3 years, Miss Palmer. I'm done." "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Why are you doing this?" The Duke went very still. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, quietly, "Because 5 years ago, someone I cared about was in a situation remarkably similar to yours, a forced arrangement. False medical claims, legal traps." His hands clenched at his sides. "And I did nothing. I told myself it wasn't my business, that I couldn't interfere with family matters. What happened? She disappeared." The words were hollow. "Officially, she went abroad for her health. Unofficially." He looked away. "No one knows. Her husband ensured that." Matilda's throat burned. "So when you ask why I'm doing this," the Duke continued, meeting her eyes again, "understand, I'm not being noble. I'm being selfish. I'm correcting a failure I've carried for half a decade." The raw honesty of it stole her breath. "Then let me help," Matilda said. "You are helping, by staying alive." "No." She moved closer, decision crystallizing. "I have something I didn't tell you." His expression sharpened. "What?" Matilda reached beneath the neckline of her nightgown, pulling out a thin leather journal she'd kept bound against her skin. The Duke's eyes widened fractionally. "Before I ran," she said, "I broke into my father's study, found this hidden in a locked drawer." She held it out. "It's Rathbone's ledger, records of bribes, falsified documents, threats, names, dates, amounts. The Duke took it carefully, opening to a random page. His expression darkened with each line he read. "This is," he looked up, "this is enough to end him. It's enough to get both of us killed." Matilda's voice steadied. "That's why I ran. Not just because of the marriage, because I knew once he realized this was missing, he'd do anything to get it back." "Yes." The Duke closed the ledger, his mind clearly racing. "How many people know you have this?" "No one. I didn't even tell my governess." "Good." He moved to his desk, locking the ledger in a drawer. "Tomorrow, I'll have my solicitor examine it. Find the strongest charges." He paused. "But Rathbone will come for you, Miss Palmer, soon. And when he does," a sound shattered the silence. Glass breaking. Downstairs. They both froze. Footsteps in the entrance hall. Multiple sets, heavy boots. The Duke's expression went cold. "Get behind the desk." "What?" "Now." Matilda moved. The Duke crossed to the door, listening. Voices rose from below. Angry, demanding. Then one voice, clear and familiar, cut through the rest. "I know she's here, Hamilton, and you're going to surrender her." Lord Rathbone had arrived. The Duke opened the library door before they could break it down. Lord Edmund Rathbone stood in the corridor, flanked by 4 men, 2 in constable uniforms, 2 in expensive suits that screamed hired muscle. Behind them, Grimsby hovered anxiously, clearly overpowered. Rathbone was exactly as Matilda remembered. Tall, silver-haired, handsome in the way poisonous things often were. His smile was practiced perfection. "Your Grace," he inclined his head with mock courtesy. "Forgive the late hour." "You've broken into my home," the Duke said coldly. "At 3 in the morning, with armed men. Forgiveness seems unlikely. A necessary measure." Rathbone gestured to the constables. "I've come for my fiancée. We have reason to believe she's taken refuge here." "Your fiancée? Miss Matilda Palmer. We were to be married yesterday." Rathbone produced folded documents from his coat. "I have the signed contract, her father's consent, and a warrant for her return issued by Magistrate Thornbury himself." The Duke didn't take the papers. "On what grounds?" "Mental instability, danger to herself." Rathbone's expression oozed false concern. "Her family is devastated. She's been having episodes, delusions, violent outbursts. We've been trying to get her help, but she ran before treatment could begin." "How convenient," the Duke said quietly, "that her instability manifested just before your wedding." Something flickered in Rathbone's eyes. "I don't appreciate your implication, and I don't appreciate liars in my home." The temperature in the corridor dropped. One of the hired men stepped forward, hand moving to his jacket. The Duke didn't flinch. "Careful," Edward said softly. "You're already guilty of trespassing. Add assault to the list and see how quickly Magistrate Thornbury's warrant becomes irrelevant." The man hesitated, glancing at Rathbone. "Where is she, Hamilton?" Rathbone's civility cracked slightly. "I know she's here. My men tracked her to your carriage yesterday." "Then your men are mistaken." "Search the house," Rathbone ordered. "You will do no such thing." The Duke's voice cut like steel. "This is a private residence. Your warrant gives you no authority to violate my property without evidence of a crime. Harboring a mentally unstable woman, whom I've never met," the Duke finished. "You have witnesses who saw someone enter my carriage. Not evidence, not testimony from my staff. Nothing that would satisfy a judge who isn't in your pocket." Rathbone's jaw tightened. "You're making a mistake." "No, you made the mistake when you assumed I'd cooperate." Behind the desk, Matilda's heart hammered so hard she thought they'd hear it. She could see Rathbone through the gap between furniture, see the fury beneath his polished exterior, the way his hands clenched. He was losing control. "The law is clear, Your Grace." Rathbone's voice hardened. "I have legal authority over Miss Palmer's welfare. If you're concealing her—" "If I were concealing anyone," the Duke interrupted, "I'd have better taste than to choose your company for this conversation. It's late, you're trespassing, and if you're not gone in 60 seconds, I'll have my own constables escort you out." "Your constables?" Rathbone laughed coldly. "You've been hiding in this estate for 3 years, Hamilton. You have no allies, no influence, no power outside these walls." He leaned closer. "I, on the other hand, have the Home Office, Parliament, and half the judiciary. So let me be clear. Surrender Matilda Palmer now, or I'll destroy you." Silence stretched. Then the Duke smiled a terrible, empty expression that made Matilda's blood run cold. Interesting, Edward said quietly, because I was about to make you the same offer. Rathbone blinked. Excuse me? You want Miss Palmer because she has something you need, something you can't afford to let surface. The Duke tilted his head. I wonder what that might be. Colour drained from Rathbone's face. You're bluffing, am I? The Duke's voice remained perfectly calm. Here's what I know. You've been bribing magistrates, falsifying medical documents, using your position to coerce women into contracts designed to strip their assets. He paused. Should I continue? One of the constables shifted uncomfortably. That's slander, Rathbone hissed. It's documentation. Names, dates, amounts. The Duke's eyes glittered. And if anything happens to Miss Palmer or to me, that documentation goes to every newspaper in London, every member of Parliament not in your pocket, and the Crown prosecutors. Rathbone's composure shattered. You're lying. She couldn't have. He stopped. Too late. The Duke's smile sharpened. Couldn't have what? Lord Rathbone. Stolen your ledger? He let the words sink in. Now we both know why you're really here. Matilda watched Rathbone's expression transform from fury to calculation to something darker. Last chance, Hamilton. His voice dropped to a whisper. Give her to me. Keep the ledger if you want. I'll leave England, disappear, whatever you demand. But give me the girl. Why? The Duke asked. She's just one woman. Surely you can find another victim, because she's seen too much, knows too much. Rathbone's mask cracked completely. Because her father's a fool who kept records I can't afford to exist, and she's the only one who knows where they are. The Duke's expression didn't change. Then you have a problem. We both have a problem, Rathbone snarled. Do you understand what you're protecting? She's not just a runaway bride, she's a witness to things that could start a political firestorm. Men more powerful than both of us will do anything to keep her silent. Then they'll have to go through me. Rathbone stared at him. You're willing to die for a woman you met yesterday? I'm willing to die, the Duke said quietly, to stop men like you from destroying one more innocent life. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Rathbone turned to his men. We're leaving. My lord, we're leaving. He looked back at the Duke, eyes burning. But this isn't over, Hamilton. When the people I work for discover what you're doing, send them my regards. The Duke's voice was ice. And tell them I'm looking forward to the conversation. Rathbone stalked down the corridor, his men scrambling to follow. The Duke didn't move until the front door slammed shut, until the sound of horses faded into the night. Then he closed the library door, locked it, and turned to where Matilda still crouched behind the desk. You can come out now, he said quietly. She stood on trembling legs. He's right. There are others, more powerful. I know. Then why? Because running out of the question now. The Duke moved to his desk, retrieving the ledger. So we do the only thing we can. What's that? He met her eyes, and she saw something fierce and unbreakable burning there. We expose all of them. Dawn broke cold and grey over the estate. Matilda sat across from the Duke at his study desk, the ledger open between them. They'd been working for 3 hours, cataloguing names, cross-referencing dates, building a case that could withstand scrutiny, and learning just how deep the corruption ran. Lord Ashford, the Duke said, tapping an entry, accepted £20,000 to delay a factory safety investigation. 12 workers died in the collapse that followed. Matilda's stomach turned. Rathbone paid him. Rathbone facilitated. The factory owner paid. He flipped another page. Magistrate Thornbury, the same man who signed your warrant, received £15,000 to dismiss assault charges against a nobleman. The victim was 14. She closed her eyes. How many? Entries? Over 200. His jaw tightened. People? Impossible to count. Every bribe enabled a crime. Every falsified document destroyed a life. And my father, her voice barely whispered. The Duke hesitated, then turned to a page marked with ribbon. Matilda forced herself to look. Geoffrey Palmer, Under Secretary. £10,000. Expedited approval for Rathbone's shipping contracts. Overlooked customs violations. 3 additional payments for discretionary services. Below that, in different ink, daughter's marriage contract. Signed. Witnessed. Dowry transferred in advance. Matilda's hands curled into fists. He sold me twice. Once for the marriage, once for the money before it. Yes. The Duke's simple honesty was somehow worse than sympathy. I keep thinking I should be surprised, Matilda said quietly. But I'm not. He always chose ambition over everything else. She looked up. My mother used to say he married her for her fortune, then resented her for having more than he did. What happened to her? She died when I was 12. Riding accident. Matilda's throat tightened. At least, that's what they said. But I remember overhearing the doctor arguing with my father, something about the saddle being tampered with. The Duke went very still. You think? I think my father needed her inheritance, and she was in the way. Matilda's voice hardened. I think I've been in the way ever since. Silence settled between them. Then Edward reached across the desk and covered her hand with his. The gesture was brief, careful, but the warmth of it cracked something in her chest. You're not in the way anymore, he said quietly. You're the weapon that destroys them. She wanted to believe him, wanted to feel powerful instead of terrified. But all she felt was exhausted. What's our next move? She asked. The Duke withdrew his hand, returning to the ledger. We need corroboration. The ledger is damning, but Rathbone will claim it's forged. We need witnesses, documents, something that can't be dismissed. The victims? Some. But many won't testify fear, shame, or they've been paid off. He drummed his fingers on the desk, thinking, we need someone from inside Rathbone's network, someone with access to his operations who'll turn on him. That's impossible. Everyone who works for him is either terrified or complicit. Not everyone. The Duke's expression shifted. There's one person who might help. Someone who has everything to gain from Rathbone's downfall. Who? His wife. Matilda stared. Rathbone is married? Was. She left him 2 years ago, fled to her family's estate in Scotland. Officially, for her health. Unofficially, he pulled a newspaper clipping from his drawer, dated 18 months prior. The headline read, Lady Rathbone's mysterious illness continues. But someone had written in the margin, in harsh strokes, not illness, prison. She tried to expose him, the Duke said, but her family suppressed it. Too much scandal, too much risk to their name. He looked at Matilda. If we could reach her, convince her we have the evidence to protect her, she'd testify. She'd bury him. Hope flickered, dangerous, fragile. How do we reach her? I'll send my most trusted courier. Discreetly, the Duke began drafting a letter. But it will take time. 3 days minimum for the round trip, longer if her family resists. We don't have 3 days. Rathbone knows we have the ledger now. He'll move against us before. A knock at the door interrupted her. Enter, the Duke called. Grimsby stepped in, carrying a silver tray with a single envelope. This just arrived, Your Grace, by private messenger, marked urgent. Edward took it, frowning at the wax seal unmarked, anonymous. He opened it carefully. As he read, his expression darkened. What is it? Matilda asked. He handed her the letter silently. The message was brief, written in elegant script. Your Grace, you have something that belongs to powerful men. Surrender it, along with Miss Palmer, within 48 hours, or face consequences beyond Lord Rathbone's reach. This is not negotiation. This is courtesy, a warning before the storm. We know everything. Your staff, your routine, your weaknesses. We know you've contacted attorneys. We know about the courier you're planning to send. Resist, and we will dismantle you piece by piece, your reputation, your estate, your legacy, and when there's nothing left, we will take what we want anyway. Comply, and this ends quietly. You keep your life, we keep ours. You have until sunset, December 11th. Choose wisely. No signature, no identification, just a postscript at the bottom. P.S. Miss Palmer should know. Her father sends his regards. He's eager for her return. Matilda's hands shook. They're watching us. Yes. The Duke's voice was granite. They know about the courier. Yes. Then we're trapped. She set down the letter. They'll intercept any message we send. They're monitoring everyone who comes and goes. We can't reach Lady Rathbone. We can't reach anyone. The Duke stood, pacing to the window. Outside, the estate looked peaceful. Gardens perfectly maintained, walls solid and secure. A beautiful cage. There is one option, he said slowly. What? He turned to face her, and she saw the calculation in his eyes, the dangerous arithmetic of a man weighing impossible choices. We give them what they want. Matilda's breath caught. You're going to surrender me? No. His expression was fierce. We're going to make them think we are. Understanding dawned. A trap. A negotiation. We arrange a meeting. Bring the ledger. Bring you. He stepped closer. But on our terms. public location, witnesses we control. And the moment they reveal themselves, we expose everything. We expose everything, he confirmed. One chance, one moment. They either take the bait and we destroy them, or they kill us both. Yes, Matilda looked at him, at this man who'd been a stranger 5 days ago, who'd become her sanctuary, her ally, her… What? She didn't have words for what was building between them. Something forged in crisis, something that felt terrifyingly real. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Really? It's not just guilt over what happened before. It's not just hatred for men like Rathbone." The Duke was quiet for a long moment. "Because," he said finally, 3 years ago, I buried the only woman I ever loved, and I stood at her grave knowing I could have saved her if I'd been brave enough to fight." His voice dropped. "I won't stand at another grave carrying that regret." Matilda's throat burned. "You barely know me. I know you're courageous. I know you're brilliant. I know you climbed into a stranger's carriage rather than accept a life of captivity." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. "I know that saving you might be the only meaningful thing I do with the rest of my life. And if we fail, then at least I'll fail trying." The words hung between them, raw, honest, devastating. Matilda made her decision. "What do we need to do?" The Duke's expression shifted surprise, then something fiercer. "Respect. First," he said. "We write a response accepting their terms. We arrange the meeting for tomorrow night at the winter masquerade ball at Lord Pemberton's estate, public, crowded, impossible to attack us without witnesses. Pemberton will allow it? He owes me a favor, a significant one." The Duke moved back to his desk. "Second, we prepare leverage. I have allies they don't know about, people who'll be positioned throughout the ball, ready to act. And third," he looked at her steadily, "we pray we've miscalculated nothing. Because if this fails, Matilda, neither of us will leave that ballroom alive." She nodded slowly. "Then we'd better not fail." Something flickered in his expression, admiration, affection. She couldn't name it, but she felt it too. "Tomorrow night," the Duke said, "we end this." Matilda took a breath. Tomorrow night. Outside, clouds gathered. The storm was coming. The ballroom glittered like a jewel box. Crystal chandeliers cast fractured light across hundreds of masked faces, lords and ladies swirling in silk and velvet, champagne flowing, orchestra music swelling through the vaulted space. Lord Pemberton's winter masquerade was legendary, attended by the most powerful families in England, the perfect stage for their gamble. Matilda stood at the top of the marble staircase, barely recognizing herself. Mrs. Winters had transformed her. Midnight blue gown with silver embroidery, hair swept into an elaborate style, face hidden behind a pearl-encrusted mask shaped like a swan. She looked like she belonged here. She felt like she was walking to her execution. "Breathe," the Duke murmured beside her. He wore black and silver, his own mask a wolf's face in obsidian, somehow making him more imposing. "You're doing beautifully." "I'm terrified." "Good. Fear keeps you sharp." His hand rested lightly against her lower back, steadying. "Remember the plan. We circulate separately. You stay visible but unreachable, always near witnesses. I'll position our allies. And when they approach, they won't. Not openly." His jaw tightened beneath the mask. "They'll send an intermediary, someone respectable, someone who'll suggest a private conversation to resolve matters. And then we follow them into the trap they think they're setting." His eyes found hers. "But the moment anything feels wrong, I run to Lord Pemberton's study, lock the door, wait for you. Promise me." The intensity in his voice made her chest ache. "I promise." He held her gaze a moment longer, then stepped back. "It's time." They descended separately. Matilda forced herself to smile, to nod graciously as strangers greeted her. Lady Pemberton had introduced her as a distant cousin visiting from the country. No one questioned it. In London society, masks weren't just physical. She accepted a glass of champagne she wouldn't drink, danced with elderly Lord Weston, who was deaf and harmless, laughed at jokes she didn't hear, all while scanning faces for threats. An hour passed. Then two. Nothing. Maybe they weren't coming. Maybe the anonymous letter had been a bluff. Maybe. "Miss Palmer." The voice came from behind her, smooth, cultured, unfamiliar. Matilda turned slowly. A man stood there, masked in silver and white, expensive suit perfectly tailored. He smiled with practiced charm, "Forgive the intrusion," he said, "but I believe we have mutual acquaintances who would very much like to speak with you." Her pulse spiked. "I'm sorry. You have me confused with Matilda Palmer, daughter of Geoffrey Palmer, currently under the protection of the Duke of Clarence." His smile never wavered. "There's no need for pretense. We know exactly who you are." She glanced around. They were near the terrace doors, partially obscured by a marble column, close enough to the crowd for safety, far enough for privacy. "What do you want?" she asked quietly. "Simply to talk. My associates are waiting in the winter garden. 5 minutes of your time, and this unpleasant business can be resolved peacefully. And if I refuse?" His expression didn't change, but something cold entered his voice. "Then the alternative becomes messy. For you, for the Duke, for everyone in this ballroom." He gestured toward the crowd. "Fire is such a tragedy, don't you think? So many casualties when panic sets in." Matilda's blood turned to ice. He was threatening a massacre. "You wouldn't." "We would prefer not to." His tone suggested he was discussing the weather. "But we will protect our interests. So," he extended his arm. "Shall we?" Every instinct screamed to run. But if she did, if she caused a scene, they might follow through, might hurt innocent people to prove their point. "One condition," Matilda said. "The Duke comes with me." "Of course. He's invited as well." The man's smile widened. "In fact, he's already waiting." Her stomach dropped. That wasn't the plan. Edward was supposed to stay in the ballroom, coordinate their allies, control the situation. If he'd gone ahead to the winter garden, either he'd changed the plan without telling her, or something had gone very wrong. "Lead the way," she said. They moved through the terrace doors into the cold night air. The winter garden was a glass conservatory attached to the manor, filled with exotic plants and illuminated by lanterns. Beautiful and isolated, as they approached, Matilda saw figures inside through the glass walls. 4 men. One of them was the Duke. She recognized his build, his bearing, but he stood rigidly, flanked by 2 others, not commanding the situation, controlled by it. Her escort opened the conservatory door. "After you." Matilda stepped inside. The warmth hit her first humid, heavy, perfumed with flowers. Then the reality of the scene. Edward stood in the center, hands at his sides, expression carefully neutral. But she saw the tension in his shoulders, the warning in his eyes. Lord Rathbone emerged from behind a palm tree, smiling like a satisfied cat. "Miss Palmer, how kind of you to join us." Beside him stood 2 other men, one she recognized as Magistrate Thornbury from his portrait in the papers. The other was older, distinguished, radiating authority. "I don't believe we've met," the older man said smoothly. "Lord Chancellor Whitmore, I oversee the judiciary." His tone was pleasant, conversational, "and I'm here to resolve this situation before it escalates further." Matilda looked at Edward. He gave the smallest shake of his head. "Don't trust them." "Where's the ledger?" Rathbone asked, cutting through pleasantries. "Safe," the Duke said coldly. "We had an agreement, Hamilton. The ledger and Miss Palmer in exchange for your continued existence." Rathbone's smile sharpened. "Yet I see only one of those things." "Because we're renegotiating terms," Lord Whitmore sighed. "Your Grace, I respect your principles, truly. But you're protecting a woman who's stolen valuable property and disrupted important political arrangements." He gestured to Matilda, almost apologetically. "This isn't personal. It's simply necessary." 2-3. "Necessary," Edward repeated. "Like falsifying medical records? Like bribing magistrates?" "Those are serious accusations," Thornbury blustered. "Without proof." "We have proof." Matilda's voice rang clear. "Every bribe, every crime, every name." She looked at each man in turn. "The ledger documents everything, and if anything happens to us, it goes to every newspaper in London and the Crown prosecutors." Silence. Then Whitmore laughed, genuine amusement. "My dear girl, do you really think the Crown doesn't know? Do you think newspapers would print accusations against the Lord Chancellor himself?" He shook his head. "The system you're trying to expose? We are the system." The words landed like blows. "That's why this ends tonight," Rathbone said. "You return the ledger, Miss Palmer accepts her obligations, and we all move forward. No scandal, no consequences." "And if we refuse?" Edward asked. "Then you disappear. Both of you." Rathbone's mask of civility cracked. "They'll find your bodies next spring, perhaps. A terrible accident. So tragic." He nodded to the men flanking the Duke. They moved, but Edward was faster. He spun, striking one man's throat, dropping him instantly. The second lunged, but Edward sidestepped, using the man's momentum to slam him into a glass wall. It shattered. Chaos erupted. Rathbone grabbed for Matilda, but she twisted away, years of dancing lessons translating into evasion. She kicked backward heels, connecting with his shin, and ran. "Stop her!" Whitmore shouted. The escort who'd brought her blocked the door. Matilda changed direction, deeper into the conservatory, into the maze of plants and shadows. Behind her, shouts, breaking glass, Edward's voice cutting through. "Matilda, run!" She ran. Through humidity and flowers, past fountains and statuary, lungs burning, footsteps pounded behind her. Multiple sets. They were herding her, cutting off exits. She burst into a circular room, the conservatory's center, glass dome overhead showing stars. Dead end. She spun, looking for escape, and saw them closing in from 3 directions. Rathbone, Thornbury. 2 more hired men. Then Edward appeared, bloodied but upright, placing himself between her and them. "Touching," Rathbone said, breathing hard, "but ultimately pointless." "Is it?" Edward's voice was steady. "Look up." They did. Through the glass dome, faces peered down, dozens of them, the ballroom guests, drawn by the commotion, witnessing everything. And among them, Matilda saw uniforms. Real constables, not Rathbone's bought men. "Lord Pemberton's security," Edward said quietly, "watching from the moment we entered, recording every word." He smiled, cold and satisfied. "Did you really think I'd walk into a trap without insurance?" Whitmore's composure cracked. "Those men are not yours," Edward finished. "They answer to the Home Secretary directly, and he's been investigating corruption in the judiciary for 6 months. He was quite interested in tonight's developments." The air drained from the room. Rathbone lunged for Matilda one last time, desperate, furious, but Edward caught him, slammed him against the glass. "It's over," Edward said. "All of it." Doors burst open, constables flooded in, real authority, untainted by bribes. Rathbone and Thornbury were seized. Whitmore stood frozen, calculating, then attempting to flee, caught immediately. Matilda sagged against a pillar, shaking with adrenaline and relief and disbelief. Edward was beside her instantly, hands steadying her shoulders. "You're safe. It's done." She looked up at him, at this man who'd gambled everything for her. "We won," she whispered. "We won," he confirmed. And then, because the masks were off in every sense, because she'd nearly died and he'd saved her, and nothing else mattered, Matilda kissed him, brief, fierce, grateful. When she pulled back, Edward's eyes were wide with surprise. Then he smiled genuinely, warmly, the first real smile she'd seen from him. "We should probably discuss that," he said. "Later," Matilda agreed. Around them, justice finally arrived. 3 days after the masquerade, London exploded. The newspapers ran identical headlines. "Corruption scandal rocks Parliament. Lord Chancellor arrested. Dozens implicated." Matilda read them in the Duke's library, still struggling to believe it was real, that they'd actually won, that the men who'd hunted her were now the ones in chains. "The Times is calling it the largest political scandal in 50 years, Edward said, entering with fresh tea. He'd been managing a constant stream of visitors, attorneys, investigators, journalists, with the same calm efficiency he applied to everything. "They're calling you a hero," Matilda said, setting down the paper. "They're calling us heroes." He sat across from her. "Your testimony was what sealed half the cases. The ledger provided evidence, but you gave it context. Names, dates. You remembered details even Rathbone's own records didn't include." She thought of the endless interviews with Crown prosecutors, the careful recounting of everything she'd overheard in her father's study, every conversation she'd been too young to understand, but old enough to remember. "What's the count now?" she asked quietly. 43 arrests, 72 more under investigation." Edward's expression darkened. "Including your father." There it was, the weight she'd been avoiding. Geoffrey Palmer had been taken into custody the morning after the ball, charged with bribery, conspiracy, and pending further investigation possible involvement in his late wife's death. Matilda should feel vindicated. Instead, she felt hollow. "Have you?" Edward hesitated. "Have you considered visiting him?" "No." "Matilda, What would I say? She stood, moving to the window. Thank you for selling me. Thank you for planning to have me locked away. Her voice cracked. Thank you for possibly murdering my mother. Edward was beside her in seconds, not touching but present. You don't have to forgive him, but you might need to face him. For yourself, not for him. She wanted to argue, wanted to insist she was fine, that she'd already moved past it. But the nightmares said otherwise. The ones where she was back in that carriage, hiding, terrified. The ones where Rathbone found her, where her father handed her over with that same cold indifference he'd shown her entire life. I don't know if I can, she whispered. You climbed into a stranger's carriage to save yourself, Edward said quietly. You stole evidence from dangerous men. You testified against the Lord Chancellor of England. He met her eyes. You're the bravest person I've ever met, Matilda. If anyone can face him, you can. The words settled over her like armor. Will you come with me? She asked. If you want me there, I won't leave your side. She nodded slowly. Tomorrow. I'll do it tomorrow. The prison was exactly as bleak as she'd imagined. Grey stone, cold iron, the smell of damp and despair. Edward had arranged a private meeting room, another favor called in, another door his name could open. Geoffrey Palmer looked smaller than she remembered. He sat across the scarred wooden table in prison clothes, hair unkempt, face haggard. When Matilda entered with Edward behind her, her father's expression flickered through shame, anger, and something that might have been regret. Matilda, his voice was hoarse. You came. She sat, hands folded in her lap. Edward remained standing near the door, present but giving her space. I came, she said. Silence stretched. I suppose, her father said finally, you're here for an apology. Are you offering one? He looked away. Would it matter? Would it change anything? No, Matilda said, but it would tell me if there's anything human left in you. His jaw tightened. You don't understand the pressures I was under, the debts, the expectations. Everything I did was for yourself, she interrupted. Not for me, not for Mother, for your ambition, your status. She leaned forward. Did you kill her? Did you tamper with her saddle? Geoffrey's face went grey. That's what they're claiming? That's what I'm asking. I loved your mother. That's not an answer. He closed his eyes. I arranged for her saddle to be checked. Had concerns about its safety. The stable master said he'd handle it personally. He opened his eyes, and for the first time, she saw genuine anguish. I didn't know he'd been bribed by Rathbone. Didn't know he'd ensure the saddle failed, not until years later, when Rathbone reminded me of the favor he'd done. Matilda's world tilted. You knew, she breathed. You knew Rathbone killed Mother, and you still... He had proof of my involvement, payments I couldn't explain. If I'd exposed him, I'd have hanged alongside him. Geoffrey's voice dropped to a whisper. So, I stayed silent, and I convinced myself it was an accident. That I wasn't responsible. That you could sacrifice your daughter to the same monster who murdered your wife. He flinched as if she'd struck him. I told myself you'd be safe, he said desperately. That the marriage would protect you. That Rathbone only wanted the money, not... He couldn't finish. Not to destroy me like he destroyed Mother. I was wrong. God help me. I was wrong about everything. Matilda stood, chair scraping against stone. You were wrong the moment you chose yourself over the people who loved you. Mother deserved better. I deserved better. I know. And knowing changes nothing. She moved toward the door, then paused. I hope you spend every remaining day of your life understanding what you destroyed. Not just your family, not just your career, but every chance you ever had to be the man you pretended to be. Geoffrey's face crumpled. Matilda, please. Goodbye, Father. She walked out. Edward followed silently. In the carriage, Matilda finally let herself shake. Edward pulled her against his chest without asking, one hand stroking her hair as she processed the enormity of what she'd just learned. Her father had been Rathbone's victim too, and then his accomplice, and finally, another criminal in an endless chain of corruption. He's weak, she said against Edward's shoulder. That's what I realized. Not evil, just weak. And weakness destroyed everything. You're not weak, Edward said firmly. You're everything he couldn't be. She pulled back to look at him. What happens now? To me, I mean. That depends. What do you want? It was the question she'd been avoiding. Because wanting things had always been dangerous. Wanting had led to disappointment, rejection, pain. But sitting here, safe in Edward's arms, she let herself want. "I want to be free," she said. "Really free. Not just legally, but," she struggled for words, "I want to choose my own life, my own future." "You can," Edward said. "The marriage contract is void. Rathbone's in prison. Your father's assets are frozen, but your mother's inheritance is legally yours." He hesitated. "You're wealthy, Matilda, independent. You can go anywhere, do anything." The possibilities were dizzying. She could travel, study, start fresh somewhere no one knew her story. But as she looked at Edward, at this man who'd risked everything for her, who'd seen her at her most terrified and loved her anyway, she realized where she wanted to be. "What about you?" she asked. "What do you want?" Something vulnerable crossed his face. "I want to stop hiding, stop punishing myself for failing someone I loved." He cupped her face gently. "I want to try again, to live instead of just exist. With me? If you'll have me." His thumb brushed her cheek. "Not as a protector, not as obligation, but as partners," Matilda finished. "As equals." "Yes." She smiled, genuine, unguarded, the first truly free expression of her life. "Then yes, absolutely yes." Edward kissed her then, properly this time. Not desperate like in the conservatory, but deliberate, tender, full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "We should probably discuss logistics," he said. "Courtship, chaperones, propriety. Or," Matilda interrupted, "we could acknowledge that I've been living in your house unchaperoned for a week, and scandal is already assumed." He laughed, actual laughter, bright and unexpected. "Fair point. Besides," she continued, "I'm done living by other people's rules. I want to write our own." "Then we will." Edward kissed her forehead. "Together." Outside, London continued its chaos. Inside the carriage, two people who'd survived the worst found something better than escape. They found each other. 6 months later, spring arrived at the Duke's estate with sudden violence. Cherry blossoms exploded across the grounds in clouds of pink and white. Gardens that had been dormant all winter burst into riotous color. And Matilda Palmer, soon to be Matilda Hamilton, stood at the drawing-room window watching workers transform the south lawn into something magical. White chairs arranged in perfect rows, an archway wrapped in climbing roses, tables set with crystal and silver, waiting for the small gathering that would witness their wedding tomorrow. Small by society standards, enormous by hers. "You're nervous," Edward said, appearing behind her with tea. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "What if I'm terrible at being a duchess? You've been managing my household for 4 months. The staff adores you. The tenants ask for you specifically when they have concerns." He set down the tea and wrapped his arms around her waist. "You're already better at this than I am." She leaned back against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "That's because you intimidate everyone." "I intimidate you?" "Constantly." She turned in his arms, smiling up at him. "But I like it." His expression softened in the way it only did with her, the severe Duke, replaced by the man who'd slowly, carefully, let himself love again. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly. She knew what he meant. "Any regrets about choosing this life, choosing him instead of the freedom she'd claimed to want?" "Not one," Matilda said. "This is freedom, being with someone who sees me as an equal, who trusts me with real responsibility, who doesn't try to control or diminish me." She touched his face. "You gave me the choice. That's what matters." Edward kissed her palm. "Tomorrow can't come fast enough." "Impatient, Your Grace?" Desperately. His voice dropped, intimate and warm. "I've been a gentleman for 6 months. My patience is exhausted." Heat flooded her cheeks. "Edward," a knock interrupted them. They separated, propriety still maintained, barely as Grimsby entered. "Your Grace, Miss Palmer, you have visitors." "We're not receiving," Edward said. "The wedding preparations—" "They're quite insistent, sir." Grimsby's expression was carefully neutral. "Lady Rathbone and her daughter have arrived from Scotland." Matilda's breath caught. Lady Rathbone, the woman whose testimony had sealed her husband's conviction, who'd emerged from exile to testify about years of abuse, control, and systematic cruelty. Matilda had written to her months ago a letter of gratitude, solidarity, an offer of friendship if she ever needed it. She hadn't expected a response. "Show them in," Matilda said quickly. "Please." Edward squeezed her hand as Grimsby departed. "You don't have to. I want to." Lady Rathbone entered with quiet dignity. She was younger than Matilda expected, perhaps 40, with silver threading through dark hair and eyes that had seen too much. Her daughter, barely 16, clung to her mother's arm. "Miss Palmer, Your Grace," Lady Rathbone curtsied, formal and careful. "Forgive the intrusion. I know tomorrow is your wedding, but her voice wavered, I needed to thank you. In person." Matilda crossed to her immediately, taking her hands. "You owe me nothing. Your courage, testifying despite everything he'd done to you, was only possible because of yours." Lady Rathbone's eyes glistened. "You gave me hope, proof that fighting back was possible, that monsters could be stopped." She glanced at her daughter. "That we could be free." The girl Sarah, Matilda remembered from letters, stepped forward shyly. "Mother says you're the bravest woman in England." "Your mother is braver," Matilda said gently. "She survived years of what I only faced for days." "We survived together," Lady Rathbone said. "All of us, every woman who testified, who came forward, who refused to stay silent anymore." She looked between Matilda and Edward. "You started something. A reckoning. Women are speaking out now, demanding investigations, refusing arrangements that would trap them." Edward's hand found Matilda's back, steadying and proud. 23 women have contacted the Duke's attorneys," he said, "asking for help escaping similar situations. We're establishing a fund, legal support, housing, protection, using Rathbone's seized assets," Matilda added. It seemed fitting. Lady Rathbone laughed, surprised and genuine. "He'd be furious." "Good," all 3 women said simultaneously. They laughed together then, the sound bright and cleansing. "Stay for tea," Matilda said impulsively. "Stay for the wedding if you'd like. I know it's last minute, but—" "We'd be honored," Lady Rathbone said softly. "Truly." The wedding ceremony was smaller than tradition demanded and more meaningful than Matilda had imagined possible. Lady Rathbone and Sarah sat in the 3rd row. Mrs. Winters dabbed her eyes openly. Grimsby maintained composure, but his smile betrayed him, and Lord Pemberton, acting as witness, looked thoroughly pleased with himself for hosting the masquerade that had started everything. But Matilda only saw Edward. He stood at the altar in mourning dress, watching her approach with an expression that made her heart forget how to beat properly. No mask now, no walls, just raw emotion, love, promise, certainty. When she reached him, he took her hands like he was holding something infinitely precious. The vicar began, but Matilda barely heard the words. She was too focused on Edward's face, on the way his thumb traced circles on her palm, on the future spreading before them like those cherry blossoms, unexpected, beautiful, chosen. "I do," Edward said when his moment came. "I do," Matilda echoed when hers arrived. And when the vicar pronounced them married, when Edward pulled her close and kissed her thoroughly enough to scandalize the vicar and delight everyone else, Matilda felt something click into place. She'd spent her whole life being told who to be, what to want, how to behave. Now she was Matilda Hamilton, Duchess of Clarence, by choice, by courage, by refusing to hide in the dark anymore. Later, as the sun set and guests departed and the estate settled into peaceful silence, Edward found her in the library, their library now, their home, their future. "Hello, wife," he said, and the words sounded like music. "Hello, husband," Matilda replied, and meant it with her entire soul. He crossed to her, pulling her into his arms with the comfortable certainty of someone who knew exactly where he belonged. "Any regrets yet?" he teased. "Ask me in 50 years. "I will." Edward kissed her temple. "I'll ask you every day for the rest of our lives, and I'll say no every time." They stood together as darkness fell, as their wedding day became their wedding night, as everything they'd survived transformed into everything they'd chosen. Outside, somewhere in England, other women were finding their courage. Other monsters were being exposed. Other trapped lives were breaking free. But inside the Duke's estate, inside Times, their Times estate, 2 people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances built something better in the aftermath. Not a fairy tale. Something real. Something earned. Something worth every risk they'd taken to claim it.